Hello! My reading has been off to a little bit of a slow start so far this month, but I have now finished 5 books and here I am to talk about them. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, which is book 2 in the Grisha trilogy, or the Shadow and Bone trilogy. It seems like the name of the trilogy has changed in the last year. I'm not 100% sure. This is the middle book in the trilogy though, and it felt like it. If I'm being honest, I felt that this was quite slow in a lot of sections. It's funny because there was a section, I can't really be too specific because of course this is a sequel, so I can't really tell you any specific plot points. The first book follows Alina, who, this is a very tropey series, there's really not a lot that's new here, but it came out a long time ago now. Probably one of the first series that dealt with all of these tropes. This one was out in 2013, which probably means that Shadow and Bone was out in 2012. So although this is pretty bog standard now, I don't think that's necessarily the case when it came out. But book 1 follows Alina, who discovers that she has magic that she didn't expect, and she's an orphan and she has a best friend who's also an orphan who she grew up with, but they're separated when she's taken by the Darkling to learn how to use her powers and to become one of the Grisha, which is what this world calls the people who have magic, like Alina does, and she has a very specific and rare kind of magic. She's the only person that anybody knows with this particular kind of magic, and that's all I'll say because otherwise it's going to be too much information because of how tropey the series is. And what I was going to say before is that there's a section at the beginning of this book that I really enjoyed, there's a section in the middle of this book that I really enjoyed, and there's a section at the end of this book that I really enjoyed. But everything in between felt very unnecessary and like it either didn't need to be there or was skirted over too quickly, which is a very odd mixture of different things to have difficulty with in a book. I do think that the third one is likely to be better because I think that this one set up a lot of things for book 3, which is why I say that this one definitely falls foul of middle book syndrome for me. So I'm hoping that I will get to Ruin and Rising this month while it's still fresh in my mind. I read Shadow and Bone in April of last year. I think I read it for the Owls, in fact, and I think leaving that bigger gap between book 1 and book 2 really impacted on my enjoyment of book 2 as well. I think if I had still had those connections to the characters, then I might have enjoyed this one a little bit more. So I'm keen to try and pick up Ruin and Rising as soon as possible. This isn't a bad book. I don't really understand why this trilogy gets quite so much hate. Yes, it's tropey, but it was written like 8 years ago. That's fine. They weren't necessarily as popular of tropes back then, so I don't have a problem with that personally. But this wasn't my favourite. I definitely liked book 1 better, and I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm going to like book 3 better as well. Like I said, it's just very, very much a middle book. So, liked it, didn't love it, didn't hate it either. Another one that I unfortunately wasn't too keen on either was A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, which was the book for my local book club, and this is space opera. So science fiction with a heavy lean towards political drama, and I didn't really know that that's what space opera is, but apparently that's what space opera is. And I usually like political storylines, especially in fantasy. That's where I find it the most often because that's what I read the most, but in the other genres of books that I read I haven't really come across it as much. So, and I do like those storylines, so this was set up for me to like it, but the plot lines were just way too convoluted for me. It's almost like the author was trying to be too clever and to make the political storylines too intricate, and once we actually found out towards the end of the story what was going on, it wasn't really as complex as it had been made out to be, in my opinion, and I feel like a good political plotline should be similar to a good mystery plotline. So you should be able to figure it out. All the clues should be there for you to put them together for yourself and be able to figure it out and pat yourself on the back once you get it right. But it should be difficult enough that you actually don't get there by yourself and you just have this huge aha moment once the ending is revealed. But actually I didn't get that with this because everything was just so obscure to me that I just didn't really enjoy it. We follow a character named Mahit Dasmar, who is from a community that doesn't live on a planet, they live in spaceships out on the reaches of space, and they want to become part of the Takes Kalan Empire. And Takes Kalan is a planet that has other planets within its empire, and there's an emperor and there's politics going on within the empire, and Mahit is sent to Takes Kalan to become their new ambassador because the old ambassador died, and Mahit suspects that it wasn't as natural as the people of Takes Kalan would have her believe, and so she begins to investigate that, and meanwhile there's political manoeuvrings going on as well. Supposedly there's a big shocking twist at the end of this, and maybe it was shocking, but to be honest, by the time I got there I just did not care. It's not that I didn't connect with the characters, but there was just so much going on and I could never tell which parts were actually relevant and which parts were just there for fun, that I just really disconnected from this story, and I just read it to read it for the book club so that I could take part in the conversation and understand what everybody was talking about. But honestly, I didn't enjoy this. I don't think that space opera is for me. I'm not going to rule out ever reading any other space opera because it very well could just be this author and I don't gel well together. This is her debut, so I don't know. But this one didn't really work for me, and it is supposedly going to be a series. I don't know if it's going to be a series or a trilogy or a duology, I'm not sure, but I won't be picking up book 2. I didn't really enjoy this at all. Next up we have With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, which is a contemporary somewhat romance, I suppose. That's not really the focus. So in this one we follow Imani, who is 17 at the beginning of this story, and she has a 2-year-old daughter, and so she's struggling with being a parent, particularly being a teenage parent, whilst also balancing school and trying to deal with all the questions that 17-year-olds across the globe have to deal with, which are, what am I going to do with my life? What's right for me? And she has an added level of complexity because it's not just what's right for me, it's also what's right for my daughter and my family. She lives with her grandma. Her father is not in the picture and neither is her mother. So her grandma is her whole family and she has her daughter. And the struggles that Imani goes through are difficult, and they're difficult to read in some places. She faces some racism, which was uncomfortable to read, and she faces bigotry because she's a teenage mum, and those parts were hard to read too. And she struggles with money, and those parts were hard to read. So this book tries to be light-hearted in a lot of places, and it does succeed at being light-hearted in some places. It's just that so much of the book is actually really dark and really difficult to read, and I think bear all of those things in mind if you decide to pick this one up. I was expecting something much more light and fluffy with this one, and I didn't get that at all. I actually found myself feeling quite uncomfortable in a lot of places, and that's a good thing, but it's also something to be aware of going into the book, because if you're going into it expecting a light fluffy contemporary book, that's actually not what you're going to get. It's not quite a hard-hitting contemporary because there are those light moments and the message overall is relatively positive, but it's definitely not light and fluffy, so I'd just be cautious of that going into this one, but I do recommend it. It is an interesting read. Just, I think I would have enjoyed it more if I hadn't gone in expecting light fluffy, because what ended up happening is I went in expecting light fluffy, got all of this really hard stuff and was like, oh, I was not in the mood to be reading this. So just bear that in mind. It is a good book, but perhaps not what the cover would have you believe. And then finally, I'm going to talk about these two together because they are in the same series. I reread Gemina by Amy Kristoff and Jay Kaufman. No, I've just got their names the wrong way round. Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Gemina, and then I read Obsidio. And I read Gemina using the audiobook, and then I was going to read Obsidio physically because I read the first two books the first time round physically and really loved it, but then having reread Illuminae and Gemina using audiobook, I just couldn't resist getting the audiobook for Obsidio as well, because the audiobooks are just fantastic. They are full cast and there's also sound effects and things in the background too, and it's just really, really, really great. And reading it physically is great too, but having experienced the audio, trying to read Obsidio without that as well, I felt like I was missing something and I missed all of the narrators' voices. So I ended up reading and listening to Obsidio, which I also recommend. I think that the audio is a slower way to read these books because there's lots of instant messages and emails and things like that that you would just cast your eye over the timestamps and things like that when you're reading physically, and when you're listening you have to listen to the whole incept between so-and-so and so-and-so on this date at this time. Every single time there's a new set of chats or emails or whatever. So it is a little bit slower that way, but it's still a very, very quick read. This series, I will tell you what Illuminae is about because of course these are both sequels. Illuminae follows Katie and Ezra, who are fleeing their planet. Their planet is an illegal mining colony, but it's attacked by terrorists, and so they're fleeing and being chased by these terrorists, and meanwhile all sorts of things are going wrong on the ships that they reside on as well. I won't say any more than that because, like I said, they're pretty fast-paced books, and if I tell you any more than that I'm taking you too far into the first book. But this whole series is great. This one, like I mentioned, was a reread for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it again. Enjoyed it just as much as the first time, if not more. I really like the characters. It's very, very fast paced. There's tons going on. There's intrigue. It's interesting. Unlike A Memory Called Empire, there's nothing that really feels pointless in there or overly complicated. There are secrets hidden in the pages that you don't... I mean, I knew that they were coming this time, so they weren't surprises for me this time, but last time, the first time, they were surprises. That's not so much the case with this one. A lot is already on the table by the time we get to this one, but it's still great. It's still really fast paced. There are still surprises. There are still things that happen that are unexpected, and it has a really good and final and conclusive ending. But I still want more. I just want to be with these characters more and just watch their lives unfold. And I think that that's a mark of a really, really good book and series, if even when you're done, you don't want it to be done. Even if you've got all the answers that you needed, which you do have by the end of this one, I still want more. And I don't get that with a whole lot of series. So really, really good. Really enjoyed both of those. So those are the first 5 books that I read in March. Hopefully I will read some more good books in the rest of March, and if you've read anything that you've really enjoyed so far or been disappointed by so far in the month of March, please do let me know down in the comments below. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.